Thank you, Kevin. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our prepared remarks, and we will now set up for our Q&A session. As we do, I'd like to make a few logistics announcements. For those of you watching on the web, please note that we will only be accepting questions from the audience in this room. For those of you in the room, if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. If I call on you, someone will bring you a microphone. Before asking your question, please stand up and state your name and affiliate institution. Please direct your questions to the people on stage. And please ask only one question so that we can get to as many questioners as possible. Since this event is about Sony's entertainment businesses, we will not be fielding questions about other parts of our business. The Q&A session is scheduled to last 45 minutes. Lunch will be available immediately following the Q&A. With that, please let me introduce to you again Kazuo Hirai, Kevin Kelleher, David Hindler, and Michael Linton. The floor is open. Who would like to ask the first question? The lady right here in the center, in the front row.
I really have to stand up? Okay.
Yes, please.
So I'm going to ask two, because you're going to make me stand up. So Kaz, you come out of the music side, and you're now in charge of electronics as well. And we've heard a lot about One Sony today. So I'm really interested in talk about how you're seeing the conglomerate working together to create incremental cash flow streams and value for shareholders. And then maybe, Michael, to you, why don't you talk about the risks? You guys did a really good job of laying out the opportunities supported by all the senior management. Could you talk about the risks that you see in the business in the next 1 to 3 years, please?
Yeah. So let me, is the microphone on? So let me take the first question on One Sony. I think that after the new management team came on board, this is last April, I've been very focused on a lot of things, but one of them has been really to make sure that the various business units within electronics, and certainly beyond electronics, with the picture company, with the music company, with PlayStation, that we all work under what I call One Sony. And I think we talked about numerous examples today of how we've been actually putting that into practice. And I think that it's very important, obviously, for each of the operating companies, each of the operating units to be profitable in and of themselves. But over and above that, as we layer on the One Sony initiatives, it really brings to the forefront the power that we bring as a company with all these various assets. And that's something that's unmatched in the industry, whether it's the electronics industry or the entertainment industry. And one great example you saw today of that manifestation, among others, is the new way that we're presenting, for example, the Columbia Lady logo. Before that, we introduced the Sony logo, for example. So those marketing, branding messages, I think that we're able to bring to the consumers is also a very important part of that One Sony in order to really have the consumers understand that we are in so many different businesses that are working together. So, Michael, maybe you want to take the second one?
Yeah, I'd be pleased to. And I should say about the Sony Columbia Lady logo, once we had it done creatively, we sort of asked ourselves, gee, why hadn't we done this 4 or 5 years ago? There was a lot that had been done across the company under Howard's leadership. I think we've just taken it one level forward. And when we see how good that looks, we thought, boy, this was an obvious one we should have been doing before. On the risk side of our business, there are a couple that, if they do keep me awake, I would name them. One is obviously piracy. Piracy continues to be a problem for us. It continues to be a problem in the music business, less than it was, because now that there are all of these various ways of people getting music online, it's less than it was in the past. Certainly for film, it continues to be a major problem for us, and certain markets have been more adversely affected than others. Spain being one of them, South Korea being another. So piracy still stays very much on the forefront, and hopefully what will happen is similar to the music business, is that over time, as there are more and more digital platforms for film and television, because television is now also subject to piracy. We saw that with Breaking Bad. The piracy will come down when people can buy it in a legitimate form. The other piece of it is a softer way to look at it, which is the real risk in a creative business like ours, which is, after all, making content, is being at the leading edge of where the audience is. Where we find ourselves oftentimes tripped up is where we try and copycat, or we try and go for the sure thing. It doesn't matter which of the various businesses we're in, music, certainly movies and television. And when we're behind the audience as opposed to being in front of the audience, willing to take that creative risk. Breaking Bad is a good example of that, of being in front of the audience. But when we're behind the audience, that's where we find ourselves not doing what we should be doing. And that to me is always a risk.
Next question. Here in the front row again on the end.
Thank you. Hirai-san.
Could you state your name and institution?
Certainly. Daniel Ernst with Hudson Square. Hirai-san, what I heard today was tremendous depth and breadth at Sony Entertainment. Not just the big hits that we know, like Spider-Man and James Bond, but early relationships with people like Seth Rogen, or signing Lady Gaga early, or working in partnership with Simon Cowell. Tremendous depth. If we go out 1 or 2 years, 3 years, sometime in the future, and that depth of value is still not recognized in the market, might Sony reconsider its stance about listing a minority stake in entertainment businesses? And as a related question, perhaps to Mr. Litton, what I heard also was a lot of very focused investments that you make, very disciplined. But sometimes in media, there's big bet opportunities, things like brethren Disney has done with Marvel or Lucas. Are those things, maybe not those specific deals, but do you have capital resources to make the bigger bets when and if you might want to? Thank you.
So let me take the first question once again. I'm not going to try to predict what we're going to be doing in 2 years, 3 years' time. But I think one of the important things that we're trying to accomplish, literally through an investor day meeting like this, is to have our investors really understand the depth and the scope of the various entertainment businesses that we're in, because I think a lot of people, unfortunately, see us as perhaps doing motion pictures, but as we presented today, the bulk of the future growth is going to be coming from the television production and the network side of the business. And then you also saw some presentations on how we're trying to grow the business in the music side over and above recorded music, for example. And so I think it's really important for us to be able to share that sort of information with our investors so that we are shedding more light on the business, but having our investors really understand where the value lies within these entertainment businesses. Michael, you want to take that?
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer on taking the risk part of it. The brief answer to that question is yes. First of all, we are willing to take the risks and take those bigger bets, whether they be making bigger movies when they come up, or signing big acts on the music side of things. We've never once found ourselves lacking for capital in that area, or frankly lacking for the courage to do so. We do it with the financial discipline I think that's required, because we don't want to find ourselves all of a sudden taking enormous write-offs. When it comes to actually going out and purchasing big IP, like the kind you're describing in the case of Star Wars or Marvel, I've been now with Sony for a decade. Whenever I've come to the Sony Corporation and seen the need to have funding that came outside of the studio or the music company, because almost the majority of what we do in terms of production is actually, is self-funded. But when we have the need to go outside and make an acquisition, we've always found that Sony has provided us with adequate capital to do so. The amount of IP on the order of what you just described is, there's not a lot of it out there, frankly. And the one thing I would argue that maybe when you look at what Disney has done as compared to any of the rest of us out there who are doing this, is they have actually a few more channels to exploit that kind of IP than we would necessarily, theme parks and things like that. So you have to measure it against that backdrop as well.
Next question, all the way over on the left.
Matthew Harrigan from Wunderlich. I just had a question firstly. Sony is one of Japan's flagship, companies. Sony is becoming, or Japan's becoming more assertive with Prime Minister, Abe. And you've got a number of markets where fantastic growth opportunities, $4.3 billion in TV advertising in India, Chinese music market smaller than Austria or Norway. But do you have any complications on the beyond the CE side in terms of, possibly even with China in terms of getting movies approved for that market, and just sort of how do you see the whole framework evolving there? And then secondly, de facto, Bond is kind of a superhero. You've got the relationship with Danjaq to contend with. Do you feel limited by Danjaq in terms of trying to do a Splinter franchise or anything like that? I know people talked about Jinx on the last movie. That probably wouldn't have been a good idea. But could you almost set up something that's like quasi, mini Avengers in terms of having more, spin-offs? Would that be complicated on account of Danjaq?
Michael, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I think what you're asking in the first instance, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is about whether Sony has a problem per se of with its being a Japanese company in terms of getting our movies into a place like China. And the answer is absolutely not. And it comes from actually, we actually have a very, very strong relationship with China Film and with SARF, and that's come out of the fact that, now for almost 20, 25 years, a lot of it through Sony Classics, we have been distributing Chinese language movies in this country. We distributed and actually produced some of the largest Chinese movies, Crouching Tiger, which went on and did over $100 million in this country. So when you look at our reputation in China, it's actually terrific as a studio and as a company overall. So we have never had a problem from a quota perspective of getting our American-made movies into that market. I would dare say if you looked at it, we probably punched beyond our weight. So that's never been an issue. As far as spin-offs are concerned, first of all, we have the next Bond that's about to be made. Amy talked about that. I don't think Danjaq or Barbara Broccoli or Michael Wilson have ever done a spin-off of James Bond, and that's really within their purview to sort of determine with MGM. We do very much have the ambition, and Amy spoke to it, about creating a bigger universe around Spider-Man. And there are a number of scripts in the works there, both in terms of the villains and the ancillary superheroes that have worked with Spider-Man, and we're working closely with Marvel and Disney on that stuff.
Great. Moving to the next question. This gentleman in the front row, on the left.
Terrific, thank you. This is Todd Younger from Sanford Bernstein. A couple questions specifically on the TV bit. Well, one question and one very quick clarification. So, in your domestic cable networks, for whoever wants to answer it, you think about the game show network. Do you think that you can succeed in the increasingly competitive distribution environment with essentially one main nationally distributed cable network, or do you think, and if not, do you think you have the opportunity to acquire somehow more, or exit that exit, or how do you, what is your plan domestically given that situation? And then the very quick clarification, sorry for the very specific nature of this, for all us Breaking Bad fans in the room, was glad to hear Better Call Saul talked about as a 2014 event in terms of delivering to AMC. Was that 2014 calendar or 2014 fiscal? Thank you.
Set your DVR, right?
So happy to answer both questions. So in answer to the first question, we actually feel pretty good about our position with GSN in its renewals with the various MSOs. David Goldhill, who's the CEO of that company, and we're also in partnership with Direct there, although we do have the majority shareholding. We've just renewed the majority of our agreements with the MSOs, so we feel we're in a good position there. Two comments on that. First, there are, I think, still a number of cable networks out there who might be good opportunities for us to marry up with, and we do take a look at those on an ongoing basis. We've also seen tremendous growth in digital gaming, which came out of Game Show Network in the first place, skill-based gaming, which is mostly, in fact, all internet related, predominantly now mobile. It's coming actually off the PC platform. And that business has grown and is also within the GSN family. So a lot of the growth with GSN is now gone past the cable channel platform itself into that gaming space. Oh, excuse me. Yes, the most important part, calendar 14. Sorry about that. I should have saved
Next question. All the way in the back here in the center.
Hi, Alan Gould from Evercore Partners. Could you tell us how much of the $8+ billion of entertainment revenue or filmed entertainment revenue comes from the SVOD players? And is that growing? I'm assuming most of it's coming from TV as well. And are you getting much in the film side there? So just a general SVOD question.
Yeah, well, a significant amount is coming from SVOD. Our TV business obviously is continuing to grow over the next several years, so obviously the digital formats are going to grow along with that. The film business is going to remain fairly stable and flat from a revenue standpoint, so we're going to get a lot of revenue out of SVOD.
Let me add to one thing about the SVOD that's been critically important, especially outside the United States. So what you found outside the United States happening in markets like the UK, France, and others is that there was a single pay operator that dominated the market, whether that be Sky or Canal Plus in France. And that, to all of the studios, presented a problem when your film contracts came up. And the contracts outside the United States are quite short. They're 3 years in duration. And you were really negotiating with only one party. What's happened now as the SVOD platforms have come in, whether that be Netflix or Love Film, which is owned by Amazon or others outside, beyond that, is you now, for the first time in many years, have a competitive marketplace for our film and television product, which has been enormously beneficial to us in terms of getting more value for our content.
Next question, also in the back on the end.
Hi, it's Brandon Ross from BTIG. I have two questions, one on the video side and one on the music side. On the video side, it's been speculated that you've been thinking of using the PlayStation to launch a virtual MVPD. Given that programmers say they're willing to license content if the bundle is protected, was wondering what is stopping you?
So let me take that question. I think your question is based on some reporting that was done. I forgot which media it was, we are looking at a variety of different ways of creating more services or delivering more content through our Sony Entertainment Network or our PlayStation Network. As you probably know, it's actually a very unique network in that the majority of the people on the network are basically, the video game demographic, which is quite different from perhaps other services that potentially may carry traditional video content. At this point, we don't have too much to talk about or to announce, except to say that we are looking at a variety of different opportunities for our PlayStation Network and Sony Entertainment Network consumers beyond the traditional game and game-related content.
Taking the next question. Here in the center. Right here, this gentleman here.
Tony Weibel, Janney Capital Markets. This question's directed towards the film division. Stars at a recent analyst day indicated that the rate card that they procured in the renewals goes down for each film going forward, but yet the demand for products seems like it's higher than ever. Are there other opportunities in that pay output window to monetize the film content?
I couldn't hear. So
are there other ways to monetize outside of the Starz output agreement that you have, given that Starz has indicated that the rate card for Sony films is going down?
Okay. So first of all, the rate card steps down quite far out in the deal. So not to specify, but quite far out. And yes, there are other opportunities. For one, for example, our animated movies are not part of the Starz deal, so that specifically is going to go elsewhere.
Any questions on this side of the room? No. Here in the front.
You have to hold it. Hi, Richard Kramer from Arete Research. I have two questions. One for Kaz Hirai. You mentioned ZEP and sort of downstream performance, but we look at companies like Live Nation that have a $6 billion revenue base. How far do you think Sony could or should go into that performance space? And wouldn't that be a natural adjunct to the music business? How widely could you roll out ZEP? And then for Michael, we heard a little bit about Crackle and some of your network properties, but you look at YouTube, which is, has 1 billion MAUs, right, and is just a burgeoning, very fast-growing advertising business. Isn't that a logical network place to put much more of Sony Entertainment content and run that worldwide as a global distribution platform, as an adjunct to your TV networks and all the other distribution platforms you have? What's preventing that? Thanks.
So let me take the first one regarding ZEP. You mentioned Live Nation. Obviously, given the number of venues we're talking about, we're not in direct competition, nor do we see that we're going to be a competitor to Live Nation anytime soon. But I do think that, as Mr. Morita explained, that we have a lot of expertise within the music business that we can leverage to get into a host of businesses, including the live concert hall business. Obviously, because we are also interested in developing artists at Sony Music internationally, as was presented, one of the ways of actually really getting to have new talent work with us early on in their careers is actually through ZEP, and that's why we wanted to expand that into some of the Asian markets so that we can tap into the Asian artist market, sooner rather than some of the other competitors. And I think that's another way of obviously making money and generating revenue as a concert hall business, but also again making sure that we are acquiring talent from the Asian markets or the markets that we do business in, including Japan, obviously, of artists. But at the same time, a lot of these artists write their own songs as well, which also bodes well for Sony ATV Music Publishing. And then it starts from there when we can get into visual merchandising, et cetera, that we have, especially in Japan. But it's really, again, having another avenue to really tap into artists very soon in their careers. Michael?
And thanks, Kaz. And an answer to the question about Crackle, yes, we do see it as a global opportunity. It's one of the reasons why we've expanded it into 22 countries at this point. The expectation is to expand it further. We've seen actually tremendous success with it as we take it outside the United States. That's been a relatively recent thing in the last couple of years. So I expect you to see it in a lot more places quite soon.
Any other questions? Gentleman over here in the orange.
Hi, Hamid Korsan, BWS Financial. What kind of assumption are you making in your revenue guidance as far as TV Everywhere goes and the risk that you could actually lose pricing power as you can go a la carte in the future? Thank you.
Wasn't sure the question. Yeah.
TV Everywhere.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I was referring to TV Everywhere. You were talking about the significance of programming on the network side. So if you're going TV Everywhere in the future, let's say 2016, 2017, as the MSOs, cable TV operators, roll the service out, what's the risk that you actually lose pricing power as far as your content goes, as TV programming? Because now you have to market directly to consumers. And I want to know what the risk is to your revenue guidance that you were providing.
So let me try and take that question. I think basically we're making a couple of assumptions. The primary assumption, although I think we're being relatively conservative going forward, is that with, as has been mentioned frequently today, the proliferation of both broadband and devices, there is going to be that many more ways of seeing our content or listening to our content going forward on pretty much on not even an arithmetical but an exponential scale. In the past we could either listen to it in the car or the home or watch it in the home, and now you can do that virtually anywhere. So actually we think that the demand for our content and the ability to sell it will increase. To the specifics of what you've described, I think for the time being, what we're assuming is that the networks that are currently purchasing our programs will continue to have the financial wherewithal based on the economics they are enjoying to continue to do so. That would every deal we've been doing, whether it be with FX or AMC, would suggest that to be the case.
Here in the center.
Oh, thank you. Doug Mitchelson from Deutsche Bank. So Fox at their analyst day outlined for their business in India 150 million of EBITDA heading towards $1 billion by the end of the decade. And one of the gems that you outlined quite clearly today is you have a very strong business in India as well. Do you have that kind of growth curve? And if so, is that what is embedded in guidance, or would that put you above the guidance that you gave today?
It's in the guidance. To suddenly see it roar up to $1 billion in income, I think would be very aggressive. Not that here are the fundamental issues. We have a very, very strong position in India, driven by the bouquet of channels that we have, given by the cricket rights that have helped to drive that. We have seen tremendous growth in that market and tremendous growth in the profitability of the channel. There are a couple of underlying assumptions that we have both made and not made in these figures that will go beyond just the natural growth in the market. So one, for example, is the current rupee exchange. We've seen significant devaluation in the rupee this last year, as almost 25%. If the rupee recovers, which you would expect it should do over time, that is not embedded in the figures. The other thing that's not really embedded in the figures properly is, and I know that Fox talked about this as well, is what will happen as the analog switch-off comes on. Because at that point, once digitization comes in and we are going to get paid properly for our subscribers, because there's typically a middleman in India as in the analog model. We see there to be, and I'm sure Fox does as well, significant increase in profits, and both in terms of the proper reporting of subscribers, as well as in terms of an increase in subscription rates, as well as just more channels being able to exist on those platforms. So yes, we do see good growth, some of which is not in there.
Next question. Over here on the left, towards the back.
Maya Venkatraman, ING. I have a question on the movie production business. You talked about cost discipline. I'm just wondering, as the number of films that you're making comes down, at what point you need a certain level of utilization? You talked about using your distribution for third party as well. But at what point is the pain point of walking away from not making a movie because you have a certain number of fixed costs that you need to use up? How do you think about that relationship as you've gone from 23 to 18?
Kaj, shall I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So a couple of things. First of all, I want to stress right now that we have in no way, shape, or form lost our commitment to the movie business. It's not, when we look at the cost efficiencies, when we look at television channels and television production as growth areas, it's not that we've lost our commitment to the movie business. The movie business sits at the heart and soul of the company, and we're very much committed to that. When we look at what is the optimal number of movies, and Amy and I have talked about this all the time, there are a number of factors that come into play. Only part of it is actually risk. Part of it is how many movies can a marketing department actually handle in a quality way in a given year. If you think about it, 18 is almost 1.5 a month, which is a lot. Secondly, the other thing to think about, and you've seen the pileup going on over the summertime, and there will be a similar pileup, I expect, over Christmas time. There are only so many weekends that are viable to release a picture. I know they say there are 52 weekends in the year. I'm frequently reminded that probably 40 of those really matter. And then even within that 40, you're down to a smaller number when you're into the Christmas and the summer period. So a lot of that drives the decision to get to 18. I do think you need a certain number of movies to make certain that you have enough revenue to cover the overhead of our distribution apparatus. I think given all of the various labels that we have, we will be able adequately to reach that number. We certainly have enough talented people here to create it. There's also, candidly, and the acquisitions business that was referred to in Amy's presentation, there are a lot of movies in the marketplace, quality movies, and we've made good money on them, like The Call, like a number of other movies, that are looking for distribution every year, and they basically come on a fee basis. So to the extent to which you can't fill out those 18, you can always pick those up. So we don't, to answer your question, and I know this is a long-winded way of getting there, we would never make a movie if the economics of that movie itself didn't play out just to fill up the pipeline so we get to a critical number. That is completely verboten. We would not do that.
Let me also add that it's not a dramatic decrease in the number of movies that we're making. This is going back a few years. We've only reduced by a couple the number of movies that we're not making anymore. So it's not a big change.
Next question. Here in the back on the left.
Hi, Ben Mogul, Stifel. Michael, your comments about Breaking Bad and piracy, if you guys were to have more VOD episodes on the entire current season, maybe even earlier seasons, would that help it? And I'm kind of curious, that's always been a consumer frustration, is there's not enough episodes from the previous season or even earlier in the season to sort of get caught up. Would that sort of help on the piracy front?
I think the single biggest issue, and Steve Moscow would agree, is not so much piracy in the United States at the moment, but it's piracy outside the United States. And I think we need to replicate more in the television side of the business what we've learned in the motion picture side of the business, which is unless you go day and date with the big properties, there tends to be, because when you have something popular, people want to see it. So if the store is closed on Sunday, they tend to break the glass. And that's a little bit what's happened with properties like Breaking Bad. The television business at this point is still the networks outside the United States on occasion roll out their broadcast of the show post the time that AMC would do here, or whatever the network would do here. I think as we tighten that window and have sort of, I don't know whether you can get to a day and date point, but you get to the place where it's within a week or even a month, that will take care of a lot of it.
Any other questions? This is your chance. Here on the aisle.
Dan Medina from Needham & Company. This question's for Michael and Kaz. How has Third Point's involvement with Sony affected how you operate your businesses?
Well, let me try to take that. I get that question fairly often, but I think one of the things that's given us is the opportunity that we present our business, and there's been more focus on our entertainment businesses, more renewed interest, if you will. And again, I think I talked about the value of being able to hold a conference like this, again, to really have everybody understand the value of our investments, the value of our entertainment businesses. That's something that is one of the direct things that have come out of Third Point's the recommendations or letter. And also, I think that we talked about accountability, we talked about the focus on costs, we also talked about in the letter that we could do better on margins, and that's something that we've been constantly talking about. And again, an opportunity to share what we're doing in that department to make sure that our margins are improving and how we intend to increase our revenue. And so again, really an opportunity to shed light on the business and to really explain to everybody where we think the business is and where we think the business is going. So that's been a positive for us. Michael, maybe if you have any additional comments.
No, I would mirror your comments. I mean, it was the impetus for us to show our wares, which has been a pleasure, frankly, and I'm delighted that we could do that. I do think we have, as Dave and Kevin have mentioned, been pretty rigorous about cost cutting and making sure that we are efficient in the way we do our business. We can always be more efficient. We can always be do a little bit better. And so to have somebody intelligent making remarks about or giving advice on this is always helpful, especially when they're a shareholder. So it's, I see it in those terms.
Any final questions? Gentleman in the back.
Brandon Ross from BTIG again. On the music side, with streaming eating into download growth, how important is it for you guys to get higher rates on internet radio in the future, especially with some of the free internet radio guys talking about getting materially lower rates in 2016?
Yeah. In terms of the rates right now, that it's all set by the compulsory rates is set by the Copyright Board. We're happy with the rates now. We're happy with as internet radio grows. As a master recording rights owners, we didn't get paid. We don't get paid for the performance of our music on terrestrial radio in the U.S. We do in other countries, but not in the U.S. So the fact that Pandora, they have 70 million active users that have a tremendous amount of streaming activity. That's just a new revenue stream that, quite frankly, didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. So we're looking at Apple's radio service that just launched. Hopefully that's going to get a big take-up. But as Doug mentioned in his remarks, when you look at the growth in streaming as a digital channel, which we think is going to grow compound rates of 30+% per year over the next few years, we think that internet radio and satellite radio is going to continue to be a pretty strong growth channel, as well as video. The video platforms with YouTube and Vivo. There's a tremendous amount of revenue opportunity there that didn't exist, quite frankly, 3 or 4 years ago. We were spending a lot of money creating these videos. Now we've got outlets that reach millions and millions of people, and it really bodes well for where the industry is going and the optimism that we have with respect to the digital growth.
We'll take one final question if there is one. Over here on the left side.
Maya Venkatraman, ING again. Just wanted to follow up on the One Sony bit. Is there an arm's length pricing arrangement when either the movies or the music business, even within Sony Entertainment or Sony Entertainment to the electronics business, for instance, either how content or your talent is priced, or do the divisions have some sort of an internal advantage from owning some of this content? So whether it's music in your movies in 4K for TVs, what is the advantage that all of that brings to One Sony strategy?
Sure, I'll take that first. That's a good question. Actually, as we work through a lot of these initiatives, obviously, for example, in some of the instances where it's marketing related, say, for example, with an electronics product or service, and we want to utilize the services of a particular artist, then obviously there has to be a negotiation that's more or less arm's length to really get the deal done, mainly because obviously if it's a Sony Music artist, Sony Music then needs to have that participation with the artist, and they can't turn to the artist to say, you signed with Sony Music, and therefore we just did a deal with electronics, so you get a lower rate. That doesn't work. What I think is the advantage, really, is less so in actually negotiating the deals, but having access to those discussions really on an early basis. Like, for example, that we have the Amazing Spider-Man, the sequel, coming up next year. We've already had numerous, One Sony meetings here in Culver City and others, where everybody's getting together to talk about the potential marketing opportunities, promotional opportunities, and that sort of discussion doesn't happen with perhaps other organizations, other companies. How we divvy up the revenue source or how we pay for the promotion merchandise, that stuff, again, each of the individual companies are responsible with their P&Ls, so we have to look at it in that light. So it's more about the access, the availability, the early discussions, which I think makes the difference. And also in some other instances, like, for example, where we're providing SP content in 4K to just the 4K Sony televisions, that's more of a unique opportunity where we said, that's a complete differentiator for Sony televisions, so why don't we go ahead and do that? Again, it's all about that access that other electronics manufacturers don't have to the 4K content. I don't know, Michael, if you had anything to add.
I can comment on a couple of things. I agree with everything Kaz has said. there is a fiduciary on the part of the entertainment companies to our partners in whether it be film, television, music, whatever, to make certain that they are properly rewarded. There's obviously certain pieces of content we have that we own outright where that fiduciary doesn't exist, and you don't necessarily need to have an arm's length. But when it comes to actually a shorthand or a shorthand of conversation, or us being willing to do stuff on an experimental or trial basis that we would not in the normal course of things want to do, we as the entertainment company, and that happens frequently. When I say frequently, constantly, we lean very, very far forward in working with Sony Electronics and working with the PlayStation Group and working with the Mobile Group. And so, we talked briefly, I think it was Edgar talked about this music bundle that's been put on the Xperia phone in India where it's bundled actually with the phone. I don't know whether in the normal course of things we would have done that with a third-party mobile provider. I dare say we wouldn't. Obviously, we're going to compensate the participants in that, but that's not something we necessarily do. On the 4K piece, that's something actually that Kaz and I worked very, very closely together on. There wasn't adequate content in the marketplace at the time that Sony was bringing these televisions to market, and so the studio made a concerted effort, both on the film and the television side, to make certain that we would either convert film and television product to 4K or shoot in 4K, so that there was enough content to make sure that there would be there for the launch of the television set, which there was plenty of, and then we went out and evangelized it to the rest of the industry, and they're now following suit. So in that particular instance, that's a good example of how we sort of, help a product get pushed forward.
And I'll just raise one more example where I think we talked on a couple of presentations about the One Sony initiative for One Direction, where SB did the motion picture for the Sony Music artist One Direction. The other component to that was, they could have shot this in, it didn't have to be in 4K, but we got Sony Electronics involved to say, if you're shooting this movie anyway, then let us provide you access to 4K equipment so that you can shoot this in 4K, which basically means a better experience for the customers going to the movie theaters to see this, but also it's another 4K library piece of content that we could utilize later on in promoting our TVs or other network services. So again, there's that component that comes in, which is something that, again, if it's three different companies trying to work on a project like this, it's going to take a lot longer to get done, and sometimes these deals just don't come together, whereas if you're just working under one corporate umbrella, everybody's in the same direction, wanting to do the right thing for the organizations that they serve, but also wider Sony, these things come together a lot quicker.
Thank you, Kazuo, Kevin, David, and Michael, and thank you all for attending the Sony Entertainment Investor Day. Today's webcast will be available for replay on Sony's website, along with the slides from today's presentation. If you exit the way you came in and go right around the corner, you'll be able to find lunch outside the door. You're welcome to come back into this room and eat it here. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.